July 29, 1984. What seemed like a routine flight between Caracas and Curaçao turned into a 38-hour nightmare. Aeropostal Flight 252 was hijacked by two armed individuals, putting the lives of 87 people at risk, including a pregnant flight attendant whose fate was shaped by the tension of those moments. With the aircraft flying over the skies of Trinidad and Tobago, Aruba, and Curaçao, authorities face an extreme challenge that culminated in an unprecedented rescue operation. A raid led by Diversion Commandos, with support from the elite U.S. military unit Delta Force, brought this harrowing chapter to an end. What motivated the hijackers? What was it like inside the cabin during those critical hours? And most importantly, what lessons were learned from this high-stakes operation? Get ready to uncover every detail of this gripping story, from moments of intense tension to the daring mission that freed the hostages. Join me to investigate the hijacking of Aeropostal Flight 252. Aeropostal. Founded in 1929 as an extension of the French Aeropostal, is one of Venezuela's most iconic airlines. For decades, it connected the country with domestic and international destinations, becoming renowned for its fleet of DC-3, DC-9, and Boeing 727 aircraft. But despite facing economic and operational challenges, Aeropostal left a lasting legacy in Venezuelan aviation history as a pioneer in regional air transportation. Simón Bolívar International Airport, July 29, 1984. At 1 p.m., Aeropostal Flight 252 was preparing for a scheduled short-haul flight to Curaçao, a journey lasting approximately 30 minutes. The aircraft, a McDonnell Douglas DC-9-50 named El Zuliano and registered Yankee Victor 21 Charlie, had been in service for just over a decade since leaving the assembly line. At the controls was Captain Arturo Jose Reyna Vizcarrondo, a highly experienced pilot with 19 years of flight instruction on DC-9 aircraft in the United States. He was a former chief of pilots and operations at Aeropostal and had undergone extensive aviation training in both the UK and the U.S. Accompanying him in the cockpit was First Officer Manuel Hernandez, who had 7 years of experience with Aeropostal and substantial training in both the U.S. and Venezuela. The crew also included 3 flight attendants tasked with assisting the 82 passengers, most of whom were Venezuelans traveling to Curaçao for vacations. At this point, everything was proceeding smoothly. The pilots were completing pre-flight checks, while the flight attendants helped passengers stow their carry-on luggage and find their assigned seats. For Flight 252, Captain Reyna was in command of piloting the aircraft, while First Officer Hernandez was responsible for radio communications throughout all phases of the flight.
Maiquetía Centro, Aeropostal 252. Requiere autorización para vuelo instrumental con destino al aeropuerto de Curazao.
Aeropostal 252. Buenos días. Autorizado a dirigirse al aeropuerto de Curazao. Contacte a Torre cuando esté listo para la puesta en marcha de motores y remolque para el taxeo.
Copiado Aeropostal 252. Autorizado para vuelo bajo instrumentos a Curazao.
The pilots conducted final checks before pushback. Instruments were configured, doors secured, fuel loaded, and passenger luggage stowed. Captain Reyna gave the go-ahead to request pushback and start the engines.
Perfecto. Todo en orden. Hernández, por favor solicita el remolque e inicia con el encendido de motores.
Aeropostal 252 solicito remolque y puesta en marcha de motores. Estamos listos para iniciar con el vuelo.
Aeropostal 252. Autorizado para el pushback y encendido de motores. Avise cuando estén listos para iniciar con el carreteo a pista.
The aircraft began its pushback as the powerful Pratt & Whitney JT-8D turbofan engines roared to life. emitting their characteristic sound. These engines, introduced in the 1960s, were renowned for their robust design, reliability, and efficiency on short and medium-haul flights. With thrust ranging between 12,000 and 17,000 pounds, the JT-8D set new standards in aviation, playing a crucial role in the economic operation and performance of the DC-9.
Aeropostal 252 solicitando carreteo a pista designada para el despegue.
Aeropostal 252 autorizado para taxiar a pista 09. Contacte a torre cuando estén listos para el despegue.
The taxi to runway 09 proceeded without issues, while the pilots conducted pre-takeoff checks, ensuring a smooth departure. The passengers in the cabin listened to the safety briefing given by the flight attendants. But would this apparent calm continue?
Aeropostal 252 listo en cabecera de pista 09. Requerimos autorización para el despegue con vuelo directo a Curazao.
Aeropostal 252 autorizados a despegar en pista 09. Vientos en calma. Ascienda y manténgase a 11,000 pies y espere futuras instrucciones.
At 1:34 p.m., Captain Reyna accelerated the DC-9 engines, initiating the takeoff roll. The aircraft lifted off smoothly, beginning its short journey to Curaçao. The first 15 minutes as they climbed to cruising altitude were uneventful. In the passenger cabin, everything seemed routine. Many travelers enjoyed the onboard meal service or took a short nap, unaware of the chaos that would soon erupt. At approximately 1:48 p.m., the aircraft began its descent to Curaçao. Everything appeared normal as the pilots configured the aircraft for landing. Suddenly, two passengers stood up from their seats, acting suspiciously. One moved toward the front of the plane, while the other headed to the rear. One of the flight attendants, concerned that the passenger might need assistance, approached him. However, he immediately grabbed her by the neck and demanded to be taken to the cockpit. Almost simultaneously, the second individual joined them, heading toward the cockpit as well. The flight attendant, shocked and visibly distressed, obeyed the hostile passenger's orders and urgently knocked on the cockpit door, claiming there was an emergency. The captain, confused by the situation, opened the door to the cockpit. In that instant, one of the aggressors pointed a weapon at Captain Reyna and shouted for him to divert the aircraft immediately to the island of Martinique. The requested destination was in the opposite direction of the original flight path to Curaçao. The captain explained that they didn't have enough fuel to reach Martinique. To avoid escalating the situation, he suggested stopping in Margarita Island to refuel before proceeding to Martinique. The hijackers reluctantly agreed, and the captain began ascending again to adjust the course toward Margarita Island. This detour represented a latent danger due to the low fuel level, since they practically had to return a little further from the airport of origin in Caracas. Upon approaching Margarita Island, with the runway visible ahead, one of the hijackers suddenly ordered the captain to climb again, insisting they avoid landing in Venezuelan territory. He once again threatened the captain, pointing the gun directly at him. Captain Reyna firmly explained that the plane did not have enough fuel to stay airborne much longer. He suggested that the closest destination outside Venezuela, given their fuel limitations, was Piarco International Airport in Trinidad and Tobago. The hijacker in charge agreed, and the aircraft climbed once more, changing course for Trinidad. Meanwhile, the fuel level became a critical concern. In the passenger cabin, the second hijacker kept everyone in their seats at gunpoint, instilling fear among the passengers and crew. The passengers, unaware of the events unfolding in the cockpit, were left confused and frightened by the sudden changes in course. The hijacker in the cockpit had prohibited the captain and first officer from making any announcements, leaving everyone in a state of high anxiety and uncertainty. The tense and harrowing situation deeply affected both the passengers and the cabin crew. Shortly after 3 p.m., the DC-9, nearly out of fuel, aligned with the ILS on runway 10 to begin the final approach. Despite the intense stress in the cockpit, the pilots managed to land the aircraft safely on runway 10 at Trinidad's International Airport. However, due to the special nature of the emergency, airport security prevented the aircraft from reaching the terminal. As a result, the plane remained stranded on the runway, forcing the airport to temporarily shut down until the danger could be resolved. For several hours, airport security officials and even the Prime Minister negotiated with the hijackers to release children, women, and elderly passengers in exchange for food and water. However, the hijackers, sticking to their original plan of demanding $5 million, a helicopter, and additional weapons, refused the offer. They refueled the aircraft and ordered Captain Reyna to take off immediately, threatening to douse the plane in gasoline and use their weapons against the passengers if anyone or anything interfered on the runway. After hours of failed negotiations, the pilots restarted the DC-9's engines and taxied back to the end of the runway to comply with the hijackers' demands, taking off again from runway 10. The plane headed for Aruba, and after approximately 20 minutes, landed without incident. However, the same situation unfolded as in Trinidad. The aircraft was left stranded on the runway, isolated from the terminal. Negotiations resumed, this time led by Aruba's Prime Minister, but the hijackers remained steadfast in their demands. A few hours later, they forced the pilots to take off again. This time, the flight was bound for Curaçao. The short trip ended quickly, and the aircraft successfully landed. Despite the immense stress in the cockpit, the pilots continued to handle the situation with remarkable skill. Once again, the plane was stuck in the middle of the runway, isolated from the terminal. This marked the beginning of the end for this dreadful ordeal. Curaçao security forces spent nearly 38 hours negotiating with the hijackers. As the dark, early hours of the morning set in, food and water supplies were running dangerously low. Sensing they were running out of options, the hijackers released 6 hostages, including Argentine national Federico Ramon Portas, who reportedly offered the hijackers an astonishing $6 million. The situation grew increasingly critical as the hours dragged on without progress in negotiations. General Henry Lopez Cisco, a highly trained police officer leading the negotiations, decided to contact the wife of one of the hijackers. She agreed to speak with her husband during the standoff, successfully convincing him to release one of the flight attendants, who was experiencing significant blood loss, possibly from a miscarriage due to the intense stress of the situation. Finally, at 1:50 a.m., a Venezuelan task force of 12 men executed a coordinated operation with airport authorities. The airport lights were turned off, and the team approached the aircraft from different angles, shooting out the plane's tires. According to passengers, Dominique Hylerton, one of the hijackers, realized an assault was underway and began pouring gasoline inside the aircraft. Commandos stormed the plane using stun grenades, taking down the first hijacker. The second hijacker, who was with the pilots, attempted to ignite the plane as the commandos entered, but was also neutralized. All 3 doors of the aircraft were open almost simultaneously, and the hostages were freed. Several passengers were taken to St. Elizabeth Hospital for treatment for exhaustion and minor injuries. The Aeropostal Flight 252 returned to Caracas the following day, bringing back all the hostages. Due to the numerous bullet holes in the plane, it flew at a low altitude to avoid pressurization issues. In the aftermath, several Haitian migrants were detained in Zulia, though they were released hours later. Meanwhile, the pregnant wife of one of the hijackers was deported to Colombia. In an interview conducted months after the hijacking of Flight 252, Captain Reyna told the media that the hijackers never revealed the motive for their actions. Speculation suggests their primary goal was to acquire a large cache of weapons to overthrow Haiti's dictator president, who had plunged the country into chaos. Hijackers were confirmed to be of Haitian and Dominican nationality. Fortunately, there were no fatalities among the passengers, though they were left with traumatic memories of the harrowing ordeal. The only casualties were the hijackers themselves. If you enjoyed this reconstruction of the events of Aeropostal Flight 252, please don't forget to like and comment. And if you'd like to see more content like this every week, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Your support helps me continue growing and bringing you more high-quality aviation content.